Hello, I'm Teru Kamiwada, a background illustrator. In this video, I'll be giving a step-by-step explanation of how I created this background. I'll cover a variety of topics, from important points to keep in mind when drawing natural elements, to tips on blending man-made objects into the scene. Please watch until the end. Now, let's get started with the making of process. First, I'll start working in Blender. Right off the bat, I've imported the main model from another project file. Since this piece is essentially a sequel to a work I created in the past, I'm using the model I made back then as is. When working with 3D CG, reusing data is a major advantage, so I make it a point to actively leverage it in situations like this. Now that the objects are ready, I'll move the camera as well, to roughly determine the overall composition. At the same time, I'll set up a temporary world and place some trees to serve as a reference for the sense of scale. Now, let's start creating the ground. After lightly subdividing a plane, I'll add a multi-resolution modifier to it. Then, I'll switch to sculpt mode and begin shaping it. Since this time the terrain will have a river flowing through it, I'll carve out a depression for that area. It was difficult to work as it was, so I added another plane to make the carved out section easier to see. After quickly setting up the material, I'll add a displacement modifier to create some natural unevenness. I deleted the temporary world I had assigned and switched to an atmospheric texture. While adjusting the camera angle, I made sure the main motif stands out. I also changed the world settings and the positions of the objects. At this point, I also moved the surrounding parts like gears to get a general sense of the atmosphere. Next, I place rocks along the boundary between the skin and the ground. I'm duplicating and increasing their number, but I'm careful to randomly change their angles so that they don't look repetitive. Next, I add plants to the ground. After preparing models of flowers and weeds as assets, I use the GeoScatter add-on to distribute these models across the ground. At this stage as well, I set it so that the orientation and size of the plants change randomly, creating a natural appearance. I felt that the terrain was too flat, so I raised the area at the back right to add some visual variation. At the same time, I also adjusted the objects accordingly. I also duplicated the trees, and when placing them, I varied their angles and heights to avoid a monotonous appearance. I also placed trees outside the camera's view. Although the trees themselves aren't visible, their shadows extend into the scene, giving it a greater sense of depth. Next, I'll create the terrain in the background. For this, I subdivided a plane and then used proportional editing to shape it. Since this part isn't clearly visible, I didn't obsess over the details and kept the design simple. Next, I'll work on the upper stream of the river, and this time I boldly blocked it off with rocks. However, just doing that looked unnatural, so I added a small waterfall to make it appear more natural. For the waterfall, I shaped it by giving the curve some width, and assigned it a material with a stretch noise texture. At the same time, I'm also adjusting the trees. Since there were many tall trees, which gave a cramped impression, I'm switching them out for slightly shorter ones. As for the area around the river, since it's quite close to the main object, I'm making sure to place things that don't stand out too much. Next, I'll scatter parts around the area. Here too, I'm careful not to let them interfere with the main object. Also, by placing them so that they lean against the ground or other objects, they have a presence without being too assertive. I also make adjustments to the large clock. By shifting or bending the surrounding decorations to create an imperfect shape, I give the clock a sense of history, as if something once happened to it. Tilting the parts of the clock face as well adds even more believability. Next, I move on to adjusting the ground. Since plants are already growing in the area where the river flows, I need to fix this. In weight paint mode, I paint only the river area red, setting it so that no plants will grow there. It's a painstaking task, but since it directly affects the quality, I make sure to paint it carefully. At the same time, I also make adjustments to the appearance of the riverbed. In addition to the ground shader, I prepare a separate shader for the pebbles, then combine nodes to create a black and white mask. By setting the mask so that the color switches at a certain height, I can separate the riverbed from the rest of the ground. By using this mask as a factor to mix the two shaders, I can change the appearance of just the riverbed. Next, I place smaller plants, intentionally arranging them around the large clock to emphasize the sense of scale of the clock. Additionally, I add objects with a glass-like transparency to bring more color and vibrancy to the scene. Finally, I adjust the colors of the flowers. Having only red felt a bit dull, so I rearrange the nodes to allow the colors to change randomly. Once this is done, I set up the line art and compositing settings that will be used for further adjustments, and after rendering, the work in Blender is complete. From here, I'll move on to adjustments in Photoshop. First, I lightly adjust the color of the sky, then add the distant landscape. After preparing an image of a mountain range, I use a brush to refine its shape and place it so that it blends in naturally. Next, I overlay the line art exported from Blender and also layer a glare image to add expressions of light. After adjusting the colors of the base image as well, I then add an atmospheric perspective effect, making it appear whiter and more hazy as it recedes into the distance. At this stage, I also use the Z-depth image exported from Blender as a mask. From here, I use a cloud brush to paint in the clouds. I'm experimenting to create soft clouds that convey a sense of high altitude. However, since I couldn't express it well, I decided to put it aside for now and moved on to adjusting the river. At the same time, I add effects to the areas where the light hits to enhance the atmosphere. I'm also adding dense fog near the ground. Finally, I redraw the clouds that I had set aside earlier, and once I refine the depiction of the light, it's complete. I think the result is a landscape that conveys both the mystery of the grand clock and the sense of clear, fresh air. I'll continue to upload more making of videos like this, so if you're interested, please subscribe to the channel and stay tuned. Well then, see you in the next video.